The dollhouse arrived in a box too large for the porch. It hadn't been ordered. No return address. Just a white shipping label with a single word written in tight cursive, "For home." Lauren stood over the box, one hand still clutching the half-drunk cup of morning coffee, the other reaching cautiously for the edge of the cardboard. The air was unusually still for late autumn in Oregon. No birdsong. Not even the faint buzzing of distant traffic. Just her breathing, shallow, uneven, and the creak of the front step beneath her socked foot. Inside the package lay a perfectly preserved Victorian dollhouse, standing nearly 3 feet tall, ornate with spindle towers and gingerbread trim. Its paint was a faded ivory tinged with ash gray, and the windows had thin, dusty curtains that swayed despite the lack of breeze. Lauren could feel something tighten in her throat. It wasn't the kind of thing you donated or trashed, especially not in a small town like Dorset where stories spun faster than the wind. And since she and Daniel had been trying for a child for nearly 5 years, neighbors were quick to offer childlike gifts as some twisted version of encouragement. But this wasn't from a neighbor. This was too intimate. Too intentional. Daniel, always the pragmatist, dismissed her unease when he came home later that evening. "It's just an antique," he said, examining the craftsmanship. "Could be worth something. Besides, it fits the room." He was referring to the would-be nursery upstairs, still barren after so many years, save for a crib bought too early, an untouched changing table, and the empty walls Lauren refused to paint. She'd insisted they keep the room ready, as if preparation would summon a miracle. They placed the dollhouse in the far corner of the nursery. As Daniel set it down, the old hardwood floor groaned beneath it, even though the dollhouse wasn't heavy. That night, Lauren couldn't sleep. At 3:13 a.m., she heard something soft click upstairs. Like a latch unhooking. She sat up, heart racing, eyes locked on the ceiling above. The next morning, she went to check. The dollhouse had changed. Where there had only been 2 floors the night before, now there were 3. A tiny staircase curled up into a 3rd-story loft that hadn't existed before. Lauren crouched down, peering through the miniature windows. There was a doll now. It hadn't been there before, she was certain. A tiny porcelain child, no more than 3 inches tall, dressed in a dusty blue pinafore with her arms stretched out as if mid-embrace. The strange thing wasn't just the addition of the doll, it was the fact that its face looked vaguely familiar. Too familiar. It looked like Lauren. Later that day, Daniel laughed it off. "You probably just didn't notice last night. Maybe it's always had that floor." But when he opened the back of the dollhouse to peer in, the 3rd story was gone. Gone. The back wall was flat. Unadorned. As if it had never existed. Lauren didn't sleep that night either. She lay awake listening, each hour punctuated by the gentle, rhythmic creaking of old floorboards above. Just one step. Then another. Then silence. At 4:01 a.m., the floorboards groaned again. In the nursery. And the house sighed. Not creaked. Not settled. Sighed. She opened her eyes wide, chest frozen in a kind of terror that had no name. The dollhouse was breathing. Lauren avoided the nursery the next day. Not consciously, at first. She told herself she was just tired. That she had work to catch up on. That the cold had seeped deeper into her bones and made the walk up the stairs feel heavier. But it wasn't any of those things. She knew exactly what she was avoiding. Still, by late afternoon, a strange anxiety pulled her toward the 2nd floor like a whisper she couldn't stop listening to. Daniel wasn't home, a late shift at the plant. The house was hers alone. Every creak, every gust through the chimney, every pop of settling wood sounded louder, closer, like the bones of the home were leaning in. When she finally opened the door to the nursery, she stopped cold. There was another window. Not in the room itself, but on the dollhouse. It had appeared on the left turret, jutting from the side where there had been only smooth painted siding the day before. This new window was Gothic, arched, with tiny cracks etched into the glass. Inside, a light flickered dimly. A real light. She didn't remember plugging anything in. The dollhouse wasn't electric. Crouching low, Lauren felt that same tightness in her chest again, a breath caught and suspended, as if the air was no longer safe to pull in. She touched the turret delicately, half expecting it to be warm. It wasn't. But the light inside stayed on, dull and rhythmic, like it was mimicking a heartbeat. The doll was gone. The one that had looked like her, the porcelain girl in the blue pinafore, wasn't in the loft anymore. In her place was a second doll, this one older, hunched, with dark fabric draped like a funeral shawl and a face too cracked to identify. The room started to feel smaller. Lauren stood abruptly, her vision swimming. The pale afternoon light filtering through the nursery curtains felt yellowed, warped somehow. She stumbled out of the room and shut the door behind her. That night, Daniel noticed her silence. "You're doing it again," he said, sitting beside her on the couch. "Getting too deep in your head. Maybe it's time we talked about selling the house. Starting over somewhere new. Fresh air. Fresh plans." But she only shook her head. The house wasn't the problem. It had followed them here. They had lived in Dorset for almost 3 years now. Before that, before the miscarriage, they'd lived in Pennsylvania. The same dreams had followed her there too. The breathless dreams. The scratching dreams. She had told herself those nightmares were grief playing its cruelest tricks. But the dollhouse, this thing, this entity, it made those dreams feel more like memories. At 2:47 a.m., she heard the familiar click again. That latch. The one from the back of the dollhouse. Then came the sound of footsteps. But not from above, from below. As if something was climbing the stairs from the crawlspace under the house. Each step careful. Calculated. Measured like a metronome set to fear. She crept into the hallway and turned toward the nursery. The door stood ajar, she swore she had closed it earlier, and a faint yellow light bled into the hallway. As she approached, the light flickered once, then vanished. Inside, the dollhouse now had a porch. A wraparound porch that hadn't existed before, complete with tiny rocking chairs and a swing hanging from invisible wire. And standing in the middle of that porch, perfectly still, was a third doll. A man. Tall. Made of resin. Wearing a faded flannel shirt with a crack down his temple and a painted beard. His eyes were 2 pinpricks of pitch, empty holes that seemed to stare directly at her, even without moving. Lauren took a step back. The nursery door slammed shut behind her. And she was locked inside. The dollhouse lights flickered back on. And the house exhaled again. Lauren pounded on the nursery door until her knuckles throbbed. The wood didn't even vibrate under her blows, it was as if the hinges had disappeared and the frame had grown around it, sealing her in like flesh over a wound. She backed away, breath ragged, and spun toward the dollhouse. The third doll, the man, was gone. She scanned the room. Nothing. But she felt it, the same way you feel someone's breath near your skin in the dark. She turned again. Slowly. The doll was standing on the carpet. Not on the porch. Not inside the house. On the floor. Just a foot away from her. Its head tilted slightly, and though it didn't move, Lauren could swear it had just turned. The lights inside the dollhouse flickered again, and now there was movement inside. Shadows shifting behind miniature curtains. Something brushing past the windows. Lauren reached out and grabbed the doll. It was warm. Not just body temperature warm, alive warm. As if it had a pulse of its own. As if blood, real blood, coursed beneath the resin. She dropped it instinctively. It hit the floor and rolled onto its back, staring straight up at the ceiling. And the nursery changed. The wallpaper peeled in seconds, curling like dead leaves. The crib in the corner, the one they had never used, began to rock back and forth on its own. A sound, thin and distant, came from the dollhouse, a lullaby played backward. Uneven, broken, like the melody had forgotten how to end. Lauren stumbled back and tripped over something that hadn't been there before, a wooden rattle. It spun in place on the floor. She hadn't seen that toy since Pennsylvania. She crawled to the wall and tried the window. It was painted shut. She scraped at the sill, tears blurring her vision. Behind her, the dollhouse had grown again. It now had a second story. Another turret. A full back porch with a tiny wooden door hanging open. And smoke. A thin gray ribbon of it, curling from the new chimney. The smell hit her like a brick, cedar smoke, clove, and something else, something sharp. Burnt meat. She turned and screamed as she saw it, her reflection inside the dollhouse window. Not a miniature version. Not a doll. Her reflection. It blinked when she did. And then it stepped away from the window. Lauren stood up and banged on the nursery door again, fists raw. She screamed Daniel's name. No reply. The lights flickered again, this time the overhead light. Then, suddenly, silence. Not quiet, silence. No wind. No hum of the radiator. Even her own heartbeat felt too far away. She held her breath. And then... click. The dollhouse front door, the tiny one, opened. Lauren stared, her mind fracturing at the edges. Her rational brain was screaming that this wasn't possible, that wood didn't grow, that dollhouses didn't breathe or listen. But the open door was an invitation. And the longer she stared, the more the nursery seemed to dim, to shrink, to fade. Until there was nothing left but the dollhouse. And the sense that if she leaned just a little closer, she might hear herself inside. Crying. Lauren couldn't move, not at first. The open dollhouse door gaped like a mouth, silent and waiting. The light inside pulsed gently, casting shadows of tiny furniture that danced like silhouettes at the edge of her vision. She didn't remember stepping forward, only the sensation of being pulled. As if some unseen gravity inside the dollhouse had caught her breath, her will, her bones. Her fingers grazed the open dollhouse porch. The wood was warm. Too warm. The moment her skin touched it, a soft suction bloomed behind her sternum. A crack, not in the air but in her, in the thin membrane that held her sanity together. She gasped, and suddenly the room wasn't the nursery anymore. She was inside. Not standing in the dollhouse, but within its space, full-sized, yet every detail unmistakably from the model. The tiny porch, now big enough to stand on. The miniature rocking chair creaked beside her, empty but recently used. The door stood ajar behind her. Cold air brushed her back. The floorboards were slightly crooked, as though the house had grown too fast and settled awkwardly. Cobwebs dangled from the crown molding. The scent of candle wax and dust was overpowering. There were pictures on the wall, black and white portraits. They looked old, but she knew these faces. Her mother. Her sister. Her, at 5 years old. But in every photo, the eyes were scratched out. She turned into the living room. It was the same room she had seen earlier from the outside, but now twisted. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, ticking backward. The fireplace glowed faintly, but no flame burned. And on the mantel sat 3 dolls. Each one was exactly her family. Daniel, Madison, and herself. She stepped closer, and the Lauren doll tilted its head. Not fell, not shifted. Tilted. Deliberately. As if to greet her. She took a step back, heartbeat slamming in her chest, and the doll mirrored her motion. "Stop," she whispered, barely above breath. The doll smiled. Upstairs, something creaked. A slow, dragging sound. Like bare feet across attic wood. She looked at the stairwell, shrouded in shadows. Then she heard it, a baby's cry. Weak. Muffled. Coming from upstairs. "No," she whispered. No, that's not real." But her legs moved anyway. Each step groaned louder than the last. The handrail splintered under her grip, as if rejecting her touch. Halfway up, she paused. A shadow darted at the top of the stairs, too fast to identify, but it had hair. Long matted. And wet. She reached the landing. There were 3 doors. None had handles. Each was painted in pale pastels like a child's nursery, yellow, lavender, mint. From behind the middle one came the crying. Louder now. She pressed her hand to the door. The crying stopped. She stepped back, heart in her throat. Then a soft voice whispered from behind the lavender door. "Mommy." Lauren's knees buckled. It was Madison's voice, but not quite. Thinner. Echoed. Like someone mimicking her daughter from inside a metal pipe. "Baby," she said. "Madison?" "Sweetheart, it's Mommy." "Where are you?" Behind the door, something scratched. Then silence. She leaned in, eye to the keyhole, and saw a flicker of movement. Not Madison. Not a child. An eye stared back. Round. Black. Too large. Then it blinked sideways. Lauren screamed and stumbled back. All 3 doors opened at once. From within each room, shadows spilled out, unraveling across the floor like smoke with hands. She turned to flee down the stairs, but the stairwell was gone. In its place, the front parlor. Again. The house had shifted. It was folding in on itself, changing layout with each blink. She ran, through a hallway, into a dining room, out onto a different staircase, then into a hall that looped back into the same cursed room with the fireplace and the dolls. She wasn't escaping. She was being memorized. Every turn she made, the house anticipated. Every emotion she had, fear, grief, guilt, mirrored by the environment. The flicker of lights when she thought of Daniel. The baby's cry when she whispered Madison's name. It was feeding on her. Growing each time she broke. She slammed herself against a window. It didn't budge. Outside, the real nursery was gone. Replaced by blackness. No walls. No ceiling. Just void. And in the void, she saw the outlines of other dollhouses. Hundreds. Thousands. Each one pulsing like a heart. And each containing someone screaming from within. Lauren stood paralyzed, staring into the void beyond the dollhouse window. That endless, starless black expanse wasn't just empty, it was listening. She could feel it press against the glass from the outside, a quiet pressure that made her ears ring and her mind fray. All those other dollhouses flickering in the dark, each with its own trapped soul, were they like her? Caught in a labyrinth shaped from memory and grief? A soft tap broke the silence behind her. She turned. The 3 dolls, Daniel, Madison, and herself, had moved. Now they sat in a miniature circle on the carpet, legs crossed, hands touching. In the center was a tea set. China cups. Porcelain spoons. One extra place, clearly meant for her. The Lauren doll patted the carpet beside it. Lauren backed away, bile rising. "No," she whispered. "I'm not playing your game." The dolls didn't move again. But something else did. From the far hallway, the one that used to lead to the bedroom, a slow scraping sound approached. It was the sound of cloth dragging over wood. Then a faint, rhythmic creak. Like a heavy weight shifting back and forth, hung from ropes too old to carry it. She ran. Through the hall. Through the kitchen. Into a room that didn't exist in the real house, a sunroom, filled with peeling wallpaper and rusted bird cages. They hung from the ceiling like chandeliers, and each one held a tiny porcelain figure. Children. Babies. Some had cracked faces. Others had missing limbs. In the center of the sunroom sat a cradle. A real one. Full-sized. Rocking gently. Empty. A lullaby drifted from nowhere, its melody warped and slowing like a record playing underwater. It was a song Lauren hadn't heard since childhood. Sleep, my child, sleep so deep, shadows guard you as you weep. She shook her head, covered her ears. No, 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 that's from Grandma's house. The voice that sang it was her grandmother's. And then, a second voice joined in. Higher. Fragile. Madison's voice. Lauren screamed. The walls of the sunroom peeled away like wet paper. Beyond them, the nursery, her nursery from 1991. With the blue-striped wallpaper and mobile of glass stars. And there, on the floor, was another version of herself. A child. Curled in a fetal position, whispering numbers. Lauren gasped. What is this? What is this? The child Lauren turned to her, face pale and eyes too wide. I broke her, the child said. I broke the rules. Now she makes me stay. Behind the crib, something moved. A shape began to unfold. At first it seemed human, female, tall, wearing a nightgown that trailed across the floor like smoke. But the proportions were wrong. Her limbs were jointed like a doll's, bent back on themselves. Her head, smooth porcelain, held no mouth. Just a dozen eyes. Each black and unblinking. Each facing a different direction. Lauren stumbled backward. The entity stepped forward with a sound like creaking wood and splintering porcelain. Her head tilted in a twitching motion, once, twice, like a puppet on a broken string. Then, a voice. It came from everywhere, not her mouth. The same whisper Lauren had heard in her dreams as a child. You wanted to be the mother, it said. So be the mother. Play with them. Feed them. Stitch their limbs back on when they cry. That's what mothers do. The doll creature reached toward her. Lauren screamed and fled, back through the hallway that kept changing. The walls stretched. The light turned red. A door appeared, she flung it open and ran through. And found herself back in the original nursery. The dollhouse stood in the center of the room. Now split wide open, its insides churning. Alive. She turned to flee, but the windows were bricked over. The closet was filled with mirror versions of herself in different stages of life, all watching her silently. A voice inside her head spoke, softer now. You belong here. All mothers do eventually. This is the only place where you'll remember everything. Why? She sobbed. Why me? The dollhouse pulsed. And from it came a memory. She was 7. Standing in this same room, watching her mother, pale, eyes hollow, whispering into a dollhouse that looked exactly like this one. Her mother had said, if you don't talk to her, she'll forget you. That's when Lauren realized it, this wasn't her first time here. She had been part of the cycle all along. She just never remembered leaving. Because you don't leave. You become part of the house. Lauren turned toward the dollhouse. Inside it, she saw Madison, sitting alone at the tea party, clutching the doll version of Lauren to her chest. Lauren stepped forward. Hands trembling. I'm coming, she whispered. And stepped inside. The moment Lauren stepped into the miniature tea room, reality seemed to tilt. The ceiling closed above her like a coffin lid, shrinking the world into dollhouse scale. The walls pulsed like lungs, every beam and wallpaper fiber subtly moving with breath that wasn't hers. The windows no longer looked out into the nursery, instead, they opened onto a void filled with stars that blinked like eyes. The table was set. The tea was steaming. And Madison, the real Madison, now sat cross-legged, cradling the Lauren doll in her lap. Her eyes were blank, unfocused, as if she were dreaming with her eyes open. A single tear ran down her cheek and dripped onto the porcelain face of the doll. Lauren tried to speak, but her voice emerged as a tiny chime. The rules had changed. She crawled to her daughter, knees brushing soft carpet that pulsed beneath her like warm skin. Madison, she tried again, but all that came out was a tinkling sound, like a wind-up ballerina winding down. And then the lights in the house dimmed. The other dolls reappeared, dozens now, shuffling in from other rooms. Some were children, others old women. Some still had human eyes. One bore Lauren's own face, aged and cracked. They gathered in a circle, humming. The sound rose into an uncanny lullaby that echoed through Lauren's mind, unraveling her thoughts. Memories began to shift, as if the house was reaching in, tearing out everything that didn't fit the story it was telling. She saw herself, pregnant in the real world, staring into a mirror that no longer reflected her. She saw her own mother, building a dollhouse in secret, whispering to it, hiding it behind a false wall. She saw her grandmother, trapped in the nursery, rocking a cradle made of bones. Every woman in her bloodline had lived in this house before. None had escaped. This was not a haunted house. This was a prison of inherited roles. A house that fed on mothers. And now it was her turn to feed it. Madison finally looked up. Her voice was soft. She said, "You'd come back when I was ready." "Who?" Lauren managed to say, her voice briefly returning. Madison pointed upward. From the ceiling, strings dropped like spider silk, delicate but impossibly strong. They attached to Lauren's wrists, her ankles, the crown of her head. She tried to move, but her body no longer obeyed her. She was a marionette. The ceiling cracked open like an old wound, and from it, the mother of strings descended. She had no face. Just a nest of black thread hair, and hands that never stopped moving. Sewing. Knotting. Pulling. She whispered without lips, "All stories need mothers. Otherwise the house forgets itself." Madison took Lauren's hand and led her to the head of the table. The dolls clapped. A broken music box played a tune in reverse. The tea in the cups turned black and writhed. Lauren looked around. Every doll was her. In different lifetimes. Different failures. Different endings. Some had no eyes. Some had no mouths. Some had been cracked and sewn back together, again and again, by the mother. And they were all smiling. Because once you accepted the house, you forgot the world outside. You remembered only your role. The tea party began. Lauren lifted her cup. Her hand trembled, but she drank. The world blinked. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, a realtor arrived at the now vacant property. The nursery was quiet. Dusty. The dollhouse still sat on the floor, pristine. Inside it, the dolls were posed perfectly. A mother. A daughter. A family. Frozen in time. Smiling. And far, far away, in another town, a little girl unpacked boxes in a brand new bedroom. Her parents had bought the house for cheap, the agent said it had history, but nothing serious. Her name was Madeline. And in the corner of her room sat a gift from the previous owners. A dollhouse. Still warm to the touch. When I first bought the house at 213 Brighton Hollow, I thought I'd finally outrun the noise. After years of living in New York City, sirens, yelling, the dull thrum of life never fully sleeping, I craved quiet. I was 35, newly divorced, and desperate for a reset. The listing for the old two-story colonial in New Hampshire read like a dream: full basement, 3 fireplaces, no neighbors for a half-mile in any direction. It felt like the house had been waiting just for me. But there was something the listing didn't mention. The switch. It was located in the farthest corner of the basement, on the cracked concrete wall just beneath the original storm drain. No markings. No wires leading in or out. Just a single rusted light switch on a wall that had no corresponding light. The previous owner, an elderly man named Raymond Grisham, had passed away in the house. The real estate agent brushed it off: natural causes, nothing suspicious. But locals in town had other stories. When I went into the hardware store to buy sealant for the basement's faint mildew smell, the woman behind the counter glanced at my receipt and murmured, "Brighton Hollow? That place still standing?" I smiled awkwardly. "Just needs a little work." She didn't smile back. "Don't go down there at night," she said. "Especially not around midnight." I chalked it up to local superstition. The town had that eerie, Stephen King kind of charm, where everyone seemed like they were playing a character from a half-remembered nightmare. But still, something about her tone stuck with me. My first night in the house, I didn't unpack much. Just the mattress, a lamp, and a box of books. I left the rest for the next day. Around 11:55 p.m., I was brushing my teeth when I heard a click from below. It wasn't loud. It was soft, so soft I thought I might have imagined it. But it happened again 5 minutes later. A sharp, mechanical click. Then silence. The basement door was open. I had left it ajar to air it out. The smell of wet stone was always heavier at night, like the house exhaled secrets after sundown. I stood at the top of the stairs for a long time, just listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement. Just that click, and a sudden, inexplicable sensation of cold air drifting up the staircase. I closed the door. The next day, I ventured down. I followed the switch's position carefully. I even brought a voltage tester. Nothing. No juice. No cables. The wall behind it didn't even seem to have insulation. I unscrewed the plate and was stunned to find that the switch didn't connect to anything. It was just there, mounted directly to stone, like someone had embedded it for decoration. That night, I waited. I sat at the kitchen table with a clear view of the basement door. Midnight came. Click. It echoed through the pipes, loud and deliberate. I sprang up, heart racing, and flung open the door. The basement was completely dark. My flashlight cut through the gloom, and I navigated to the switch. It had flipped up. I knew I left it down. I stared at it, sweat prickling at my back. I flipped it off. The room fell into silence. I waited. Nothing. The next night? The same thing. Click. Midnight. Switch up. I tried taping it down. I wrapped duct tape across the entire plate. Still, click. The tape tore as if something inside forced its way back up. I installed a motion sensor camera. The file was corrupted. I pulled the entire panel off the wall. And yet the next night, there it was, a new switch, in the same place, pristine, ready to be flipped. By week's end, I began dreaming of it. Of standing in the basement, naked and cold, as the switch hovered in midair, glowing faintly, humming like a distant choir. And the worst part was, I felt the overwhelming urge to flip it myself. Like something in the house was waiting for me to do it, calling me to join the chorus. By the second week, I stopped trying to explain it. I had made every rational attempt. I checked the breaker panel, clean. I called an electrician from town. He squinted at the switch, ran his fingers along the concrete, and stepped back like he'd touched a snake. "There's no line. This isn't wired to anything," he muttered, frowning. "So you're saying it's decorative?" "No. I'm saying it shouldn't do anything." "And yet," he said, "it flips itself up. On its own. That's not normal." He left in a hurry. Didn't even charge me. The locals avoided eye contact when I brought it up. It was like I'd stepped into some unspoken rule: we don't talk about the house on Brighton Hollow. A waitress at the diner finally leaned in, whispering over my scrambled eggs. "Raymond Grisham used to hear things too," she said. Said the switch kept him up. Said when it was on, he'd see lights under the door. Choir music. I stopped chewing. "What kind of choir music?" She hesitated. "Old church hymns. In Latin." I hadn't told anyone, but I'd heard the singing too. It started on the fourth night. Just after midnight, when the switch flipped on by itself again, I noticed a subtle glow from under the basement door. I crept down in my socks, stood frozen in the kitchen, and heard the faint sound of voices, distant, perfectly in tune. It wasn't random humming. It was organized. Controlled. A choir, with parts and structure and rhythm. It wasn't English. The syllables felt ancient, stretched by deep, resonant throats. The voices came from the basement, but the room was empty. And yet, impossibly, the switch was warm to the touch. I tried to record it. My phone wouldn't cooperate. Every time I hit record, the app would freeze. One night, the screen split down the middle, showing two versions of my face from the front camera, one smiling, one absolutely motionless. I smashed the phone the next morning. I called my sister Rachel in Chicago and asked if I could come visit. She heard something off in my voice, something I couldn't mask. "Sure," she said quickly. "Are you okay?" I said yes. That night, the switch flipped on again. This time, when I opened the basement door, the light wasn't under the door. It was on the stairs. A faint line of illumination crawling upward like fog, stretching toward me. I took a step back. And then another. The voices grew louder. Still soft, but closer now. No instruments, just breath and harmony. And beneath it all, a single organ note, a deep vibration that didn't come from the basement, but from the walls themselves. I slammed the door shut. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I packed a bag and drove 5 hours straight to Rachel's. I didn't tell her everything, just that the house felt off, and that I needed a change of scenery. She poured me coffee and let me crash in the guest room. I was exhausted. Mentally unraveled. But at least I was away from that damned switch. Or so I thought. Because on my third night in Chicago, at exactly 12 a.m., the guest room lamp turned itself on. Not flickered. Switched on. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. And from the hallway, I heard it. That same, chilling harmony. The choir had followed me. Rachel didn't believe me. She was kind, concerned, even made chamomile tea, but when I told her about the lamp turning on by itself and the faint singing in the hallway, she smiled too carefully, like someone handling a fragile lie. "Maybe you're just tired," she said. "You've been through a lot with the house. Sleep deprivation can do weird things." I didn't argue. But deep down, I knew this wasn't sleep deprivation. This was persistence. Something had attached itself to me, and no amount of distance or logic could keep it away. That night, I stayed awake on purpose. I kept every light off. Sat in a corner of the guest room, holding a kitchen knife like it was a holy relic. Midnight came. And with it, the choir. Not loud. Not violent. Just there. It crept in like mist, a hum first, then syllables I couldn't recognize but somehow understood. Words that made my skin crawl and eyes water. They sang in unison, an ancient liturgy that curved inside my skull. I covered my ears. The air felt heavier. My breath steamed in the cold. And then, I saw the switch. It was mounted on the wall across from me. Plain. White. But I hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't part of the guest room. Rachel hadn't renovated. And yet, it was there, like it had always been. And it was in the on position. I lunged toward it and flipped it down. The singing stopped. Just like that. A vacuum of silence filled the room, deeper than any quiet I'd known. Not peace, emptiness. Rachel found me the next morning curled in the corner, eyes wide open. I didn't remember falling asleep. She insisted I see a doctor. I agreed, just to make her stop worrying. I even booked a therapist. Said all the right words about trauma and coping. But I wasn't coping. I was running. And whatever this was, it was faster than me. Back in Vermont, I made the decision. The switch had to be removed. Properly. If it was tied to the house, if it originated there, then it had to be cut out from the root. I hired a demolition crew. Told them I was remodeling the basement. 3 guys with saws and masks came in and ripped the panel clean off. We found no wiring. No source. Just an empty box embedded in the concrete like a tumor. Still, I felt relief when they pulled it out. I filled the cavity with salt, then sealed it with cement myself. Old folklore. My grandmother would have approved. That night, I watched the basement door. Midnight passed. No singing. No lights. No switch. I slept for the first time in weeks. 3 days later, I started hearing footsteps. They came from the attic, not the basement. At first, just creaks. But then, definite steps. Someone walking in a slow, steady circle above my bedroom ceiling. I climbed up the ladder the next morning and found nothing but dust and mouse droppings. No footprints. No signs of anyone, or anything. But nailed to one of the wooden beams above the insulation, I found a sheet of paper. Burnt at the edges. Yellowed. It was music. Handwritten notation in crimson ink. A 4-part choral harmony. The title? Lux Tenebris, Latin for light of darkness. And beneath the final bar, to be sung at midnight. I didn't know it yet, but I was no longer just the listener. They were preparing me for something else. Something far worse. I burned the sheet music that morning. Every bar, every crimson note, consumed in the fire pit behind the house. But by the time the flames turned it to ash, I already had it memorized. It was like the song had embedded itself beneath my skin. The harmonies haunted the back of my tongue. When I closed my eyes, I could hear the altos rising under the tenors, as if my own mind was orchestrating a concert I never asked for. That night, I made the mistake of humming a single measure, just one, while brushing my teeth. I caught myself in the mirror. My mouth moved, but the voice was not mine. Too low. Too full. Like a dozen throats singing through one body. I spat the toothpaste out and stared at my reflection. Behind me, in the mirror, a light switched on. But the room behind me was dark. I turned around, nothing. The mirror flickered. And then I saw it, the switch was back. Not in the guest room. Not in the basement. Now it was in the hallway, mounted directly beside the attic ladder. Same design. Same faint hum around it like static electricity in the air. And it was flipped on. I didn't touch it. Not this time. Instead, I climbed the attic ladder with my phone flashlight. Every board creaked louder than it should. The insulation pulsed under the heat. It smelled like burnt paper. The attic was empty, except now, in the far corner, a wooden chair faced the wall. Not old. New. Smooth pine legs. There was a black robe folded neatly across it. And beside it, pinned to the wall, another sheet of music. Same ink. Same signature. Only this time, the Latin had changed. Ad lux semper. Toward the light, always. I didn't take it. I didn't touch the robe. I climbed down. And that night, for the first time in weeks, the singing resumed. But this time, I wasn't the only one who heard it. Rachel called me from across the state line. Her voice shook. "Ethan, please tell me you're not playing anything right now." My heart stopped. Why? Because I'm hearing a choir. Outside my window. At midnight. Just like what you described before. I didn't know what to say. My knees buckled. I pressed the phone to my ear harder. She continued. "And the worst part? It's singing your name." I ran outside. Nothing but wind and stars. The house sat silent behind me. No music. No switch. Just shadows. But deep in the woods, something blinked, like a small white light. Then another. And another. It wasn't fireflies. They blinked in sequence, following a rhythm I knew too well. The choir had moved. And I realized then, removing the switch hadn't destroyed anything. It had only freed it. Rachel arrived 2 days later, eyes hollowed, voice frayed from lack of sleep. She hadn't even brought her suitcase. Only her cat, and an old hymnal from her childhood that she now carried like a talisman. "They followed me," she said the moment I opened the door. "Or maybe, they never left you." I didn't ask her to elaborate. There was no need. That night, we sat together in the living room, surrounded by lit candles, trying to drown the silence in vinyl records. The turntable spun quietly. Chopin, Debussy, Miles Davis. But nothing stayed on longer than 5 minutes. The sound would distort, slow down, then die, always at the exact stroke of 11:57 p.m. And at midnight? The switch turned on again. Now it wasn't in the basement, or hallway, or attic. It was in the kitchen. Nestled where the coffee pot usually sat, between the outlets. Embedded perfectly into the wall. No seams, no wires. Just there. Humming softly. Rachel's face turned white. It's feeding off location. Off intention. Every time we try to ignore it, it gets closer to where we live. I walked up to it, heart hammering. The moment I raised my hand to touch it, the bulb above the sink flickered to life. From the hallway behind us, we heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Heavy enough to suggest someone barefoot. But we were alone. We turned together. There, at the end of the hall, the attic ladder had descended on its own. The door above it gaped open, dark as a throat. Rachel whispered, "Don't go up there." "I won't," I lied. But my feet didn't listen. The ladder creaked beneath my weight. Each step I took sent waves of nausea through me. By the time I reached the top, the attic had changed again. Now there were 4 chairs, not one. Arranged in a crescent. And hanging on the beam was a length of rope. Not tied into a noose, no. Into a bough. Like a gift. A black velvet ribbon knotted elegantly, trailing down like an invitation. And in the center, where the music had once hung, there was now a mirror. Old. cracked. It didn't show my reflection. It showed a choir. Boys and girls in funeral robes, eyes closed, mouths open in silent song. Their faces looked vaguely familiar, one like a neighbor who'd disappeared years ago. Another, like Rachel as a child. And the one in the front? He looked exactly like me. But with his mouth stitched shut. Suddenly, music blared through the attic. Not from the mirror. From the kitchen downstairs. Rachel screamed my name. I turned and bolted down the ladder, but the attic door slammed shut behind me mid-step. My foot slipped. I tumbled down, hitting each rung, barely catching myself at the last second. She was in the kitchen, facing the switch. "It's singing again," she whispered, eyes wide. And indeed, the walls themselves seemed to vibrate with voices. Ad lux semper. Ad lux semper. Always toward the light. But the light they followed, the one that lit each time the switch turned on, it wasn't just illumination. It was command. The house wasn't haunted. The house was performing. And the conductor was still tuning his instrument. I don't know how long we stood there. Rachel and I, side by side, bathed in the cold light of the humming kitchen switch. The melody, that damn chant, now bled through every surface. Not just the walls. Not just the attic. But the floorboards, the windows, the vents. As if the house had grown lungs, and each whisper of the choir was its breath. Ad lux semper. Ad lux semper. It was louder now. With every midnight switch, it gained volume. Strength. Clarity. As if the house wasn't haunted, but being rehearsed. I turned to Rachel. "We have to break it." Her eyes didn't leave the switch. "It doesn't want us to break it. That's why it moved. That's why it grew. It needs us to watch. That's part of the ritual." "What ritual?" She pulled out the hymnal she'd brought and flipped to the back cover. Scribbled there, in a frantic, unfamiliar hand, were 3 words. Ad lux semper. She held it up. "This isn't Latin from the Bible. It's not even Latin at all." And then she turned to the last page, a torn fragment of a newspaper she had tucked in. It showed a burnt house. Ours. But the article was dated 1954. "This house already burned," she said. I took it from her hands. My stomach turned. 4 children had died in the blaze, along with their music teacher. The only surviving witness was a girl named Rachel, age 7. She blinked at me. "I don't remember this." And then, like air collapsing in a sealed room, the light turned off. Total blackness. No hum. No chanting. Just silence so thick it pressed against the skin. We stumbled back into the living room, hearts thudding. But the lights in there were dead. Windows gone. Door disappeared. Only the attic ladder remained, now centered in the room. And this time, it was me who whispered, "Don't go up there." Rachel didn't move. "I think it needs a finale," she said. "One last song." I shook my head. "That's what it wants." "Then maybe giving it what it wants is how we end it." Before I could stop her, she climbed. Each step echoed like a drumbeat through the house. And when she reached the top, the attic didn't look like an attic anymore. It looked like a stage. Lit by unseen footlights. Curtains of shadow. And the audience? I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, packed tightly into the walls, their breath heavy, their silence expectant. Rachel stepped to the center, raised her arms, and began to sing. No melody I recognized. Just a raw, human tone of sorrow and resistance. Her voice cracked at first, then steadied, then lifted into something beyond words. A cry of defiance. A plea for mercy. A command to release. The house responded with a groan, deep, ancient, and wet. Boards shuddered. The ceiling warped. The mirror in the attic shattered. And downstairs, the switch blew apart, sparks flying like angry bees. The lights flickered once, then died. I called out to her. No answer. Climbed the ladder. Empty. Just 4 chairs. Just silence. And a single note from her hymnal, fluttering to the floor. To end the song, one must leave the choir. Rachel was gone. The house had taken her, or released her. I'll never know. They found me days later, curled beneath the attic ladder, muttering a melody no one recognized. They say I hadn't eaten. That I spoke only in song. They tore the house down. Built condos on the lot. But every once in a while, at midnight, residents still hear a switch click on behind a wall that doesn't exist. And in the silence that follows, a voice always sings. Ad lux semper. And another joins it. And another. And another. Until the house breathes again. Waiting for the next conductor.
Laura and Michael Hartman arrived at Cedar Ridge just before sunset, the cracked gravel drive crunching beneath their SUV. The old windmill stood atop a gentle rise, its wooden blades motionless against a blood-red sky. They had fallen in love with the property's isolation, 40 acres of overgrown pasture, a crumbling barn, and this lonely monument to a long-abandoned grain operation. The real estate agent had warned that the mill hadn't turned in decades, but she'd framed it as a quaint novelty. Laura, an artist, saw only the soaring silhouette and imagined studio light filtering through its slats. Michael, a historian, dreamed of uncovering forgotten journals in its dust-choked interior. By nightfall they'd unpacked a few boxes in the mill's ground level, their bedding, a lantern, canned soup. The wooden door groaned on its hinges. Inside, the air smelled of damp pine and rot. A narrow ladder led upward into a shaft lined with iron rungs. Beneath their boots, the floorboards creaked like ghosts stirring. As they set out their camp stove, Laura's lantern beam caught something half-buried beneath a tattered rug, the corner of a leather-bound book. She knelt and brushed away decades of dust and sheep droppings to reveal a worn cover embossed with curling letters, Diary of Clara Wiles, 1927. They exchanged a glance.
Michael's heart pounded.
Clara Wiles, she had been one of the fraternal twins born to the original miller, according to local lore. She and her sister had vanished one autumn night, and the mill's machinery had stalled forever. No bodies were ever found. The townsfolk whispered that the twins had fallen into the grinding stones or fled with the wind, but nothing was certain. Inside the diary, Clara's penmanship was neat and controlled, though the ink had bled through soggy pages. The first entry read,
September 2014, 1927.
Today the wind has been restless. Mother says the mill's sorrow will last until someone learns our secret.
Laura flipped ahead.
A second entry.
September 2021. The whisper came again. Softes Alovasbrit.
It spoke my name from deep within the foundations.
Michael's lantern trembled.
Beneath the diary lay a set of peculiar sketches, crude floor plans showing the windmill's base and scrawled beneath the word under.
A faint line traced a circle beneath the foundation center.
That night, as Laura read aloud, the wind outside rose. The mill's blades groaned, a soft, mournful creak, though no breeze stirred the treetops. The lantern flickered, and in the halo of light, Laura swore she saw movement behind the ladder, a small, pale hand slipping back into shadow.
Michael snapped the diary chute.
We need to find out what Clara buried, he said.
Underneath this place. Laura nodded, voice tight. First light tomorrow, wie Breg trug his floor. Downstairs, the windmill site again.
It wasn't wind that made the timbers shudder, it was something buried waiting. Before dawn, Laura and Michael crept back into the windmill's ground floor, armed with a crowbar, a flashlight, and Clara's fragile diary. The first light of morning slanted through the dusty slats above, illuminating the scuffed wood and decades of grime. Laura laid a tarp around the rug where the diary had rested, while Michael pried up the loose floorboards one by one. Each board creaked like a groan, fragments of hay and insect husks tumbling into the hollow beneath. After 20 minutes they cleared a roughly 4-foot square opening. At its center lay a heavy iron plate, rimmed with rust. The plan had been to lift it as if tipping a trapdoor, but Michael found a latch tucked into a carved recess along the edge. With a puff of stale air, the latch released, and the plate tilted back on ancient hinges. Beneath them yawned a shaft of darkness so deep their flashlight beams vanished into blackness.
Laura swallowed.
Clara said, under the foundation. She wasn't kidding. They descended a ladder of iron rungs slick with moisture, each step echoing against cold stone. At the bottom, the stench of mold and earth hit them, wet clay, decaying wood, and something coppery like old blood. Their light swept across an underground chamber, roughly hewn from bedrock, perhaps once used for storing grain. Against one wall, stacked in neat rows, were dozens of identical wooden boxes, each the size of a shoebox, bound by black iron straps. In the center of the floor sat a low stone altar, its surface carved with interlocking circles and the same rune-like sheaves of wheat they'd spotted in Clara's diary. Atop the altar lay a single twin-sized dress, the other half of Clara's, its fabric moth-eaten but still crimson with age.
Laura's voice trembled.
But Clara and her sister Evelyn, the twins, one went missing, one stayed. This must be Evelyn's dress. Michael approached the altar. His beam caught scribbled words around the base in faded charcoal. If one ascends, the other must remain. The boxes shifted suddenly, rattling as though something inside struggled against their confines. From the shadows beyond, a low whisper drifted, indistinct but achingly familiar, two voices in unison, calling Mother, Father.
They spun toward the sound.
In the gloom at the far end of the chamber stood a small doorway, exactly the height of a child. No door hung there now, just a rough opening carved into stone, as if someone had smashed through. The whispering grew louder, echoing off the walls with each syllable synchronized to their racing hearts.
Laura schone her light into the corridor beyond. A narrow passage, slanted downward like a root twisting toward water. She hesitated. Clara's last entry.
She wrote, when Evelyn sleeps below, I cannot wake. She never finished the sentence. Michael swallowed hard. We don't know what we'll find down there.
He closed his eyes.
But we have to keep going. They took each other's hands and stepped into the tunnel. The stale air closed in, heavy with secrets. The floor sloped so steep it felt like crawling into the earth itself. The whisper sharpened to two distinct voices, one high, one low, singing a lullaby in a language neither recognized but both felt in their bones.
Halfway down, Laura's foot struck so meeting solid.
She swept the beam aside, another altar smaller, carved with the names Clara and Evelyn, joined by a third name, scratched out beyond recognition. Beneath it, the ground was smooth stone, not earth. And at its center lay a gilded music box, identical to the one Clara described, with a single tune inscribed on the lid, The Shepherd's Rest. Michael knelt to open it, but Laura grabbed his arm.
Wait.
Above them, the passage began to hum, a deep vibration, like a choir humming just out of earshot. The boxes above rattled again. The flicker of their lanterns revealed movement. At the tunnel's far end, two pale shapes crouched in the gloom, hair matted, faces turned away. The lullaby swelled into a haunting duet.
Michael whisperet, Evelyn? Clara. The Schappes Rose.
Laura felt her blood freeze as she saw. One was dressed in a tattered crimson dress, the other in the same faded blue pinafore they'd found in the mill. Two ghostly girls, identical but for their hair color, stepping toward them on uneven stone. Their eyes were empty sockets, but their mouths curved in sorrowful smiles.
Te extende delikate Hans, Bekoning.
Behind them, the darkness pulsed with the rhythm of the hidden blades above, an echo of the mill's sorrow. Laura and Michael exchanged a glance, fear, wonder, grief intertwined.
The twins, voice wove togeter. Lead us home.
They realized then that saving one sister required bringing them both back into the light, while the windmill's ancient grief still waited to claim another life. The sisters' hollow eyes locked onto us as we stood in that narrow stone tunnel. The air thrummed with their silent lullaby, and the walls felt slick, as if the windmill's tears had seeped down through the cracks. Emily in crimson and Clara in blue glided forward, their feet never touching the floor. I tightened my grip on Michael's hand.
Clara. Evelyn. Michael whisperet, voice brittle.
They stopped just beyond arm's reach. Their lullaby faded into two fragile breaths, hearts echoing off the stone. Then Clara, the one in blue, lifted her head and pointed up the tunnel. The way out, she mouthed, though no sound passed her lips. Evelyn in red tilted her head toward the music box. Michael knelt beside it, brushing away dust to reveal a winding key. The inscription on the lid, The Shepherd's Rest, gleamed in the lantern's glow.
He turned the crank. A vapid, childlike waltz poured out. Notes tremoring like candle flames in drafty darkness.
Immediately, the chorus of whispers above ceased. The boxes in the chamber snapped shut with dull thuds. The twins stretched out hands, Clara's delicate fingers brushing Michael's arm, Evelyn's hand resting on Laura's shoulder. Their touch was ice-cold but gentle, and suddenly the passage grew wider, the walls brightening as if guided by unseen lanterns. "I'm coming," Laura murmured, voice trembling but steady. We followed the girls uphill. The stones underfoot shifted into wooden boards at the tunnel's mouth. We emerged beneath the windmill's ground floor, where dawn's pale light filtered through the slats. The twins paused at the base of the ladder. Their forms flickered, as though freed from centuries of waiting. Clara turned to Michael and pressed the music box into his hand. Evelyn pressed a second, identical box into mine.
2 tunings, 2 sisters.
Clara's lute-like melody chimed from Michael's box, Evelyn's mournful dirge from mine. They offered small smiles that cut through my exhaustion. "Finish the song," they whispered together, and the windmill moaned above us, its blades stirring for the first time in decades. We climbed the ladder together, carrying the boxes. With each rung the melody grew stronger. At the landing, sunlight glinted off the gears as the mill's machinery groaned back to life. Michael and I positioned the boxes on the old grain hopper's rim. On our signal, we turned both cranks. The shepherd's rest waltz entwined with Evelyn's lament, weaving a harmony that rang through the timber beams. The windmill blades creaked and then spun, casting sunlit patterns across the dusty floor. The ground trembled. A rush of wind gusted through the open hatch, carrying the twins' forms upward. They touched the blades once, turning toward us with bittersweet smiles.
"Thank you," Clara breathed. "Thank you," Evelyn echoed.
Then they dissolved into shafts of light, drifting up through the mill's heart. The machinery slowed, then settled into a gentle whisper. The boxes fell silent, their melodies fading. We stood on the landing, heartbeats syncing with the light thrum of the turning blades. Below, the buried altar split open, revealing rows of empty wooden boxes, each one opened and hollow. The sorrow that had weighed on Cedar Ridge lifted like a breath. In that moment we understood. Clara and Evelyn had shared their final secret, and the windmill had danced its grief away. Michael closed his eyes.
"They're home."
Laura nodded, voice choked, "They're finally free." The blade slowed to a stop, and for the first time in 98 years, the mill was still, and at peace. Dawn's first light found us dusty, half-dazed, at the base of the windmill. Clara and Evelyn were gone, free at last, but something in the air felt unresolved. Michael swept a wisp of straw from the diary's cover. "I think there's one more entry," he said, flipping back to the very end. The final pages were water-stained and torn. In Clara's spidery script, a single half-sentence lingered. "Father wept in the gear room. He said if we left, so would the wind. I fear his grief calls out even now."
"My blood ran cold. The gear room could only be the teeny loft up of the grinding stones. Wer the mills original mach innere still sat silent under Ata Paulin."
Michael found the ladder and began its ascent. I followed, clutching the twin music boxes. Each rung rattled, and a hush fell as the calculated creak of oiled timber echoed around us. We emerged into the gear room, shafts and cogwheels coated in half-dried oil, lanterns swaying on dusty hooks. At the center, draped in a moth-eaten blanket, lay a figure, an old man in tattered overalls, body curled around a broken millstone. His graying whiskers and hollow cheeks marked him as the long-dead miller Arthur Wiles. Yet his chest rose and fell with ragged breath.
"Michael Stieflet agasp."
"Father!" he whispered, stepping closer. The miller's eyes flew open, clouded, frantic. He reached out, grasping Michael's sleeve with skeletal fingers. His voice ground through cracked lips. "You freed them, but what of the wind? It falters without your song." He tried to sit, then collapsed against the gears. As he fell, he ripped the tarpaulin away, revealing an aged lever embedded in the wall, an emergency brake for the mill's blades. Its paint was scratched by frantic nails. Under the lever lay a small alcove carved into the stone, containing a curled parchment and a single rusted key. Laura picked up the parchment. It was Arthur's confession, penned in frantic scrawl. "I bound their voices here so the wind would never die. My daughter's laughter was the only power I needed, but in my folly I cursed them, and this land.
I beg forgiveness."
Release the brake, but only when the windmill sings with their true harmony.
Her voice cracked. He meant to trap them. Michael slid the key into the lever's lock.
The windmill above rattled in anticipation, blades quivering like giant wings. We exchanged a glance. If we pulled that lever before restoring the music box's song, the mill would creak back to life, but under a false power.
I clutched our 2 boxes.
"We have to merge their melodies first," I said, voice shaking.
In the loft, where Arthur bound them.
We wound each crank together, Clara's waltz building beneath Evelyn's lament, until the notes intertwined, rising in a single pure hymn.
The miller's eyes fluttered shut, Tiers tracing grooves trug ears of grime.
Beneath our feet, the gears began to move, at first hesitant, then with growing confidence. The lever's chain rattled down the wall as it released.
The blades outside wird into moshine, casting rolling shadows trug es lettedwals.
The miller exhaled one long, relieved breath, and then lay still. Laura knelt beside him, gently closing his eyes.
He's free, she whispered.
The twin tunes echoed overhead, carried out onto the emerald fields beyond.
The windmill's heartbeat throbbed. Stidi, alive, honest at last.
Hand in hand, we descended the ladder. At the ground level, the first breeze in decades whispered through the windows, stirring stray straw into dance. The metal door creaked shut behind us, and somehow, the old mill stood lighter, as if its centuries of sorrow had finally flown away on the wind. We left the windmill at dawn's first gold, carrying the empty music boxes and the brittle diary. The mill's blades turned steadily now, creaking in a gentle rhythm that felt like a living heartbeat. Across the ridge, the fields of dying wheat swayed in time with its song, as though every stalk had learned to dance. The township of Cedar Ridge stirred to the sound. Neighbors paused in their morning chores, eyes widening at the mill's long silent wings now glinting in the sun. Word spread quickly, the Wiles windmill worked again. Curious farmers and children wandered up the gravel road, marveling at the breeze it summoned. No one questioned why two torn music boxes lay on its steps, or why a pair of identical twin dresses fluttered on the fence posts like signal flags. Laura and I returned to the chamber beneath the mill one last time. The stone altar was empty, the wooden boxes vanished as if they'd never held little skeletons. In the corner, a single feather drifted to the dirt floor, a pale pinion, too dusted for any living bird. We pocketed it, proof that Clara and Evelyn had finally taken flight. Back at our cottage, I opened the diary to its last blank pages.
I scrollt a final entry in my own hand. September 1930, 1927, Oktober 5, 2025.
We heard the last verse of the twins' song and set their father's grief to rest. The windmill breathes again, powered by memory and forgiveness. As I wrote, a breeze stirred the curtains. I glanced up to see golden wheat shimmering past the window, though no wind blew outside. Then, faint and distant, I heard two voices humming a lullaby, high and low entwined. In that instant they were both near and impossibly far. That evening, we climbed the hill one final time. The mill's interior was warm from the day's turning gears. We wound both music boxes together, once softly, releasing their last notes into the rafters. The blades slowed and stopped, then began their gentle spin once more, but without the mournful groan. Now they whispered with contentment.
Laura stot beniat the turningseils, eyes closed. Can you hear them? She asked.
They're singing to each other.
I listened. The wind in the puddles sounded like twin laukharter echoing trug the wood.
Around us, the wheat fields turned silver in the dusk, bowing to the breeze. As the sun slipped behind the pines, we left the diary and music boxes on the mill's threshold, gifts for any who came after, so they might understand the sorrow that once lived here and the joy that replaced it.
Wie walket the long drive way home beniat a sky full of stars, windmill blades spinning softly behind us.
In our pockets, the single feather and a memory, that love between sisters, between father and daughters, had the power to revive the wind and calm the ages. And in Cedar Ridge, every breeze since has carried their lullaby.